I actually figured out recently how to have my stream screen up in Discord. Did you want cameras, or are you fine with just voice?
I'm fine with voice because I'm not showered
Perfect.
yet.
Neither am I. We're both unclean.
Unclean in the filth.
That's right.
Excellent.
Okay.
Also,
what's up?
If I hear Trump, also I just keep getting the urge to vomit every time I hear Trump's voice pop up on your stream.
You don't like it?
I mean, as much as he likes to raise the stakes, like, I just have almost Vietnam flashbacks to about a year or so ago every time, but that's okay. So, but yeah, what did you want to talk about specifically?
Okay, so in the discussion on political violence, I often approach it from a moral perspective, and usually not one from a legal perspective. Perhaps you could enlighten me on some legalese in the discussion of violence. Like, where does that line start and stop? What are perhaps like legal variations of violence as far as like political action, like protesting without a permit, you know, I don't know, spray painting a cop car, you know. What are your takes generally on like political violence?
Okay, so from the legal standpoint, there are a lot of different ways that you can go about it. Because in terms of I'm going to say like the smaller petty stuff, such as spray painting a cop car and things like that, you know, those are, legally speaking, criminal acts of vandalism that are usually taken care of under each state's criminal code, since these things are a state-by-state matter. But if we're talking about the deeper philosophical understanding of political violence, then I think a good place to start would be first how larger acts of resistance are treated in the United States versus, you know, how the state inflicts violence on people. So first and foremost, if we're talking about people inflicting political violence on each other, then we would be talking about things in the U.S. Code in the federal level, such as 18 U.S. Code 2385. No, that's a bad one to start off on. Let me see here.
I don't know how law people like memorize all these numbers.
I pulled them up before our chat, that's why. Because I can't remember all these numbers off the top of my head, because I'm a general practice guy, and if I tried memorizing every single little thing, I would go insane. So, not quite what we do, thankfully. But so under Title 18 of the U.S. Code, as an example, there is Section 2383, Rebellion or Insurrection. You know, so we're just going to take as an example what happened on January 6th. So, you know, that was political violence of the people against, you know, other people in the United States who are on the opposite side of the ideological spectrum, as well as against the government. So when it comes to, you know, codifying laws that prohibit political violence against the government, there are such things as, you know, rebellion or insurrection, where whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, etc., shall be fined under this title or in prison not more than 10 years or both.
Right.
And shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. And, you know, so historically that's pretty consistent with how the United States has treated insurrections against it, but that's not necessarily what we're talking about when we talk about political violence, because oftentimes political violence is most often exercised by a state against its people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that based on how the United States has inflicted political violence on its people, I think that suddenly, the statistics of 1 in 3 Americans stating that violence against government can be justified, I think that data makes a little more sense just in the context of everything. So,
right.
How familiar are you with the First Amendment, first and foremost?
I use it as a talking point for the most part.
Okay.
I don't have like a really like robust like knowledge, I suppose. I guess the question's never really been asked, like, how much do you know about the First Amendment? We have like this idea of like what it is, freedom of protest, freedom of religion, or freedom of assembly, speech and all that. So I mean, I guess my question is like, why do you ask?
Well, just because, historically speaking, the First Amendment has been used not only as a great tool in helping people push back against the government, but it's also been just given because this is in the American standpoint. If I remember you stating yesterday, we're talking specifically about America.
Yeah. I think the focus will mostly be on America, since I believe only one person will be British in this discussion.
I mean, Brit-bongers are going to be disregarded anyway,
True,
so screw
true.
them. I'm kidding. No disrespect, but... okay, so... yeah, when we're talking about the history of the United States, there's been a pretty persistent and prevalent use of political violence and political force against multiple types of people. So, for example, Black Americans who were first not considered citizens and could never be citizens whatsoever, based on a Supreme Court decision before the Civil War, called Dred Scott versus Sanford. But even after they were granted citizenship, the state found multiple ways to oppress them, use them for free labor, and do all sorts of terrible things to justify, a very racialized treatment of them.
Mm-hmm.
And same with labor unions, where, not only has the state stepped in to basically uphold the interests of employers by, violently brutalizing workers, but the Supreme Court, through such decisions like Lochner versus New York, pretty much upheld horrendous treatment of people and the exploitation of workers. So, in that respect, when we're talking about political violence in the way that, philosophically, we understand it. And I'm sorry if I'm kind of going into boring lecture mode, but I want to just get my thoughts out there.
Mm-hmm.
So, in the way that we understand political violence from the videos that were just watched,
Mm-hmm.
I think that a good way to look at it is that the state has been free to use suppressive violence against its citizens, and when it's come to passing laws either in the form of, Supreme Court decisions or legislation, things have always been used to commit political violence against disparate groups of people who can't defend themselves, because it's been in the interest of the United States government to do so. So, in that respect then, when we're talking about the United States being founded on, systemic oppression of multiple groups of people, we also have to look at how the First Amendment upholds that power dynamic. Okay. So, as an example, are you at all familiar with the fuck, I forget what this specific case is called. Let me just pull these up really quick, because this is the kind of reference material I was thinking of.
Okay.
So I think it's... Here we are. So, if you haven't heard of the case commonly known as the Village of Skokie case...
I have not.
Alright, I'm going to read you the full title of this case.
Okay.
So, it is National Socialist Party of America versus Village of Skokie. So, to give you an idea, Village of Skokie, Illinois had a population of approximately 70,000 people, of whom 40,500 were Jewish, and included in this population are thousands who survived detention in Nazi concentration camps. So, in 1977, Frank Collin, the leader of the Nazi Party of America, informed Skokie's police chief that they intended to march on the village's sidewalk on May 1st. And as a result of media attention, and a number of phone calls allegedly made by the Nazi Party members to residents with quote-unquote Jewish names, this planned demonstration became common knowledge among Skokie's Jewish community. So, understandably, the Jewish community was very off-put by this, because, I mean, obviously, it's a Nazi, it's a Nazi political party marching through a majority Jewish town. So, basically, this case is important because it is... Oh boy. So basically, it's a case that upholds the Nazi Party's First Amendment rights to do that march and to, basically politically assemble and do things like that. Because the Supreme Court has traditionally made a distinction between what's acceptable free speech and what is, criminal conduct. So, of course, inciting violence or doing things like shouting fire in a crowded movie theater when there is no fire, that would be criminal conduct. But the existence of things like... Oh man, someone got yeeted into the shadow realm. Oh no.
Yeah. I'm not really here for Holocaust memes. So yeah, they got yeah.
Oh god, Jesus. Okay. Yeah, fuck off then.
Yeah,
but
5 chats to Holocaust denial Olympic record. Yeah, he really speed ran his way into the Nosball territory.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that there was yeetage there.
Yeah.
So basically, something that the United States has not been particularly good at making a distinction of is, regular political thought and regular political beliefs and leanings versus political beliefs and leanings that are inherently built on committing violence against other people. So,
right.
You and I can both agree that the Nazi Party, the Ku Klux Klan, the Westboro Baptist Church, all have their beliefs grounded in, basically committing some form of political violence against a marginalized group of people. I mean, white supremacy is about oppressing and, even killing other members of our society. So the Supreme Court hasn't made this distinction, so vile groups like the Nazi Party are, able to organize marches if they get the proper paperwork. And another one that you may have heard of is... That's not it. Pulling it up again.
Hey, Read and Rap, thank you for resubbing.
Have you heard of Brandenburg versus Ohio?
I can't say that I have.
Okay. So, with Brandenburg versus Ohio, This is a case where, and I'm just gonna read you a summary of the facts again, because I'm using this very handy website called oye.org. It essentially has summaries of Supreme Court cases that were a fucking godsend for me in law school.
Hell yeah.
And, you know, it's like, honestly, they make good summaries of for people who may not necessarily have the time or the patience to read through an actual Supreme Court decision. So Brandenburg, a leader in the Ku Klux Klan, made a speech at a Klan rally and was later convicted under an Ohio criminal syndicalism law. The law made illegal advocating crime, sabotage, violence, or unlawful methods of terrorism as a means of accomplishing industrial or political reform, as well as assembling with any society, group, or assemblages of persons formed to teach or advocate the doctrines of criminal syndicalism. So, I think this was at a Klan rally, so it wasn't a march or anything like that. They were in the middle of bumfuck nowhere, in the middle of a field, burning crosses. And I think he was advocating for violence, but it was at a rally. So the question that was answered by the Supreme Court is: did this Ohio law prohibiting public speech that advocates various illegal activities violate Brandenburg's right to free speech, as protected by the First Amendment? And basically the Supreme Court said yes, this law did violate those free speech rights. And basically, the court's reasoning is a little wonky here, but they say that speech can be prohibited if it's directed at inciting or producing imminent lawless action. So, for example, a certain group of people on, say, let's go with the hypothetical date of January 6, 2021.
Okay.
Holding a rally and saying that we're going to fight like hell in, gladiatorial combat or whatever to take back the country. And then shortly afterwards, hundreds of people converge on the Capitol and do an insurrection, that kind of thing. That could be incitement of imminent lawless action. And speech can also be prohibited if it's likely to incite or produce such lawless action. So, the Criminal Syndicalism Act made illegal the advocacy and teaching of doctrines that promote violence, while ignoring whether or not that advocacy and teaching would likely incite imminent or immediate lawless action. So basically, because the guy was preaching these things at a Klan rally, even though the Ku Klux Klan is traditionally understood as,
a violent hate group.
Yeah, a violent hate group that has actively lynched people and is built on not only built on the bodies of countless Americans, but built on the, premise of violently suppressing groups of people.
Right.
So they can advocate violence pretty freely.
But they can't say, go do violence. Right?
I mean, yes or no, because they can say that if it's at a rally and it doesn't immediately cause violence to happen, it's something where people are going to be able to play around with the words that they use to get around those types of restrictions. But,
right.
Even at that point, like, basically the point that I'm getting at here is that political violence only really seems to be an issue if it's a left-leaning thing
right.
in the United States.
Of
as
course.
In trying to inherently change society for the better, which would mean disassembling the type of society that we have now. And I think that through the United States' history of, suppressing different groups of people and enforcing unjust hierarchies through white supremacy and things like that, then it's really no surprise that while state force has been used many, many, many times to oppress black people or, shoot down workers who just want better conditions. Groups like the Klan or the American Nazi Party can advocate for the shit that they do. Because philosophically speaking, the Klan, the Nazis, and the state are on the same side.
So, if I'm understanding what you're saying, the kind of advocacy for violent action, the ginning up of, whatever kind of social or economic fervor that exists within a population, so long as violent acts occur kind of stochastically, then the person that's saying, hey, violence kind of pog, is not liable? Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, legally speaking, stochastic terrorism doesn't really have, a law that's been codified against it. And so, that's why you have fuckwits like Lauren Southern,
Richard Spencer,
Tucker Carlson, Richard Spencer, being able to exist and, still advocate through their very finely tuned language, the oppression of different types of people. And exactly right, Mac. This is more a discussion on violence and political violence through the legal sense.
Right.
So, legally speaking, stochastic violence aren't, man, fuck you, Alec. Don't you mute my voice.
What the fuck? Dude. I mean, listen, if we're being charitable, Vosh does have a wonderful voice. So, I mean, I can kind of understand that to an extent. Listening to you or me is not going to be as, soothing to the ears.
Look, I understand, as one chatter said, where it sounds like I haven't hit puberty yet, but I promise.
Wait, who the
I'm
fuck
saying
said
good
that?
things
Who the
too.
fuck said that? Show yourself. Show your face.
No, not in this chat. I
Oh.
mean, when I was in Talorx's stream the other day and I was talking briefly on there, somebody said that, and it's just like, man,
That's
come
mean.
on.
That's mean. What the fuck?
Oh, goodness.
I feel like that too, especially when I have my headphones in and I have my mic coming through it so I can hear myself. I feel that way too. It's well, my voice is kind of it's not super masculine or anything, but then I'll listen to videos afterwards, or I'll see myself on someone's stream and I'll be like, oh, okay, it's not that bad. It's maybe I'm too self-conscious,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've kind of gotten over that just from hearing myself on microphone for over a decade. So it's just okay, I've gotten used to it. I just don't like hearing my voice back. But if I got to comb through my streams just to make sure that everything is running properly, then my ego has put that aside.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like whenever you hear yourself on a voicemail, you're like, ew.
Ew, gross.
Yeah. Anyway, so what I will imagine is going to happen in this discussion, and maybe you can kind of tell me what a good approach to take to it is
okay.
The discussion of oh, you think violence is only cool whenever your people do it. That's going to come up, and that's that's more of a rhetorical discussion. But inside of that discussion is a good conversation to be had about the kinds of violence that are done on opposing view sides. In the most extreme case, I guess we would say Antifa for the left, and on the right, Proud Boys, 3%ers, January 6 types, Unite the Right type beat. So when we're talking about what violence is done on these sides, I think one, body count is probably something to take into consideration, because I think it's a little slanted, if you ask me. And
surely
the actual types of actions that are done. So let's take Antifa, since we're all filthy ancoms here. So, obstructing traffic. Okay, this is like technically a crime, but or more like a I don't know. Would you call this like a civil offense?
I mean, it would be a violation of an ordinance.
Okay. So
at the very least,
yeah.
you know, it could very quickly turn into a criminal action if somebody gets in an accident or a civil action. But yeah.
Okay. So like blocking traffic, defacing public or private property in the case of like, you know, maybe a brick goes through a window in like an extreme case, or a like public statue is like spray painted for like, you know, Confederate generals or whatever. It seems that a lot of the violence is on the left, more geared towards property, less towards people, although there are incidents of like fights breaking out or scuffles with counter protesters. On the right, we have like very extreme examples of like what right-wing violence looks like. Accosting people in public, obstructing traffic as well. Actual like
Rittenhouse.
Rittenhouse. Public beatings. Actual like stochastic terrorism in the case of like that guy at Unite the Right that killed Heather Heyer and like injured a bunch of people with his car. People like making bomb threats. Like all of these things exist on the right. While I think there's some crossover of like some actions and like sometimes like outside agitators like come into each one of these, you know, let's be real. So could we maybe take a legal analysis of, let's do the left and then we can take a look at the right, and we'll kind of just, instead of like breaking down all of them, kind of look at like where we can at least make an argument for like why one of these things is not as bad as the other.
Okay. So I think the best way to approach this first and foremost is to go through a purely lawyer brain perspective.
Okay.
So just from what we're looking at in terms of what specific crimes are committed, you know, in quote unquote left-wing violence versus right-wing violence, they don't compare in general. And the reason why I would say that is because in terms of the types of right-wing violence that we see, as you said, it's included, you know, it has included deaths or actual physical harm done to people in general, like what Stuck in Phoned 79 says, with the Proud Boys on a stabbing rampage in DC.
Yeah.
You know, so that would be grievous bodily injury done to other people, and sometimes murder, although it's almost never charged like that. Whereas I think on the left-wing side, if we're to look at it in a quote-unquote objective way, since there isn't really such thing as objectivism, you know, just in the legal realm, but not in reality.
Right.
I would say that left-wing political violence has more to do with property damage. Because, and I think this, well, I'm going to just keep going on the lawyer brain track here for just a second before I go into philosophy, but I think that has to do with the fact that, you know, it's merely property damage that's committed with, you know, spray painting and vandalizing, or, you know, occasionally folks breaking windows.
Yeah, or even like looting, which
yeah,
does happen.
I mean, like if we were to accept that looting was part of left-wing action specifically, as in it's done by left-wing people as opposed to opportunistic folks that take advantage of a situation, you know, it would still be theft of property and property damage, which, as a business owner myself, that would fucking suck if my business got burned to the ground or if people stole stuff from it. But in the philosophical realm, there has to be a distinction between why the right wing commits political violence and why the left wing would do it. If we're talking about political violence as in, a damage to people and property, which may not necessarily be the case. So the reason why the right wing would do it is because their beliefs are built on suppressing and oppressing other people.
Right.
Specifically with folks like the Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys.
Ooh, there's a name I haven't heard in a while. Boogaloo.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And which other weird variation of boys or guys you might want to throw in the mix. Just because my brain is farting all over the place and I cannot remember the name of any other group.
Sons of Odin, yeah, that's another one.
Yeah, thank you. So, those folks are specifically geared towards violent conflict with other people to uphold their idea of what society should be, which is, a white society, a straight society, a cisgendered society.
Yeah, white Anglo-Saxon
like
Protestant, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, in the left-wing perspective, if we were to go by what Zizek was saying, the type of political violence that the left would be committing is is founded on the grounds of trying to liberate people from oppression. That's very true, patty on the wagon. Their philosophy is on liberation, and their philosophy is on freeing people from the types of oppression that the right-wingers want to lock into place.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think a response that I would bring up to people saying, "Oh, your guys do it too. Why is it okay when the left wing does it?" First of all, we should probably go into, we could go into separating like what's legally correct with what's morally or ethically correct.
Yeah.
And so I think ethically speaking, the left wing's goals are a lot more virtuous than what the right wing would have to offer, since the right wing is purely built on violence against other people.
Right.
But if we were also to just think about things this way too, from an activist perspective and from just a sociological perspective, the police are also a lot softer on right-wing violence. They may be more aligned, legally speaking, so...
You brought up Rittenhouse earlier. I mean, in many cases, literally cooperating with the police.
Well, exactly. So, not just with the police, but also with... not just with Rittenhouse, but also with cases where, as an example, Dylan Roof shooting up that church in South Carolina. That was South Carolina, right?
I believe so. I don't know. I mean, all of these mass shootings, they just start to blend together.
Yeah, I mean, they were able to take him alive. Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, I think they even took him for food afterwards. As you said, all these things kind of blend together for me.
Yeah, he was the Burger King kid.
Yeah, but, long story short, they were able to take him alive. They were able to, do their job properly. But then they, murder, unarmed black people constantly. And not only that, but on this specific topic, while they tend to be a lot more buddy-buddy with people who commit right-wing violence, when it comes to left-wing protests, they are very, 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 very happy to use force on left-wing protesters and arrest left-wing protesters for things that aren't even violent. I remember from Black Lives Matter in 2020, when there were mass protests in my city, and there were just constant reports of people being arrested, for protesting past curfew, I think. And it's just okay, well, they didn't actually commit any kind of harm on people. They were just arrested.
Oh yeah.
That kind of fucking sucks.
I was almost arrested or detained, not for a protest, but during a curfew, the last hurricane that came through. And boy, at 3 a.m. when a cop in full like tactical gear is like shining a Q-beam light in your face after you just had a big cry because your dog was in the hospital, that's a good feeling. You know?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, of course. And I'm trying to remember like a specific instance.
Well, I mean, we can take a look at like if you ever want to take a look at the 2020 BLM folder I have, like off stream, because it's not Twitch TOS friendly. It's a fascinating look at the timeline. Lens is a guy on Twitter who lost his eye at a protest. He wasn't doing anything violent, but he ended up losing his eye because he was shot in the head with a rubber bullet.
Yeah, and I've heard like a good number of those types of incidents happening with protesters where the state's force was used to inflict grievous harm, grievous bodily harm against left-wing protesters, or just Black Lives Matter protesters, I should say. It's ludicrous. And on the other side of the coin, somebody had driven through a group of protesters in Lakeside, Virginia, and this was also in 2020, but, you know, the guy seemed to be very friendly, you know, buddy-buddy with the cops. Like, I think shortly after the incident happened and when he was arrested. So, it bothers me because, you know, there's an obvious difference in how people are treated.
Yeah. And part of it is because oftentimes cops are quite literally part of these groups.
Oh, yeah. Like, I remember a specific incident where somebody that I was somewhat familiar with from a family member working, you know, in a museum as part of a security detail with this person. Like, I saw news a year later in that, you know, he was arrested, or not arrested, god damn it. Like, he was a school resource officer who lost his job because he was also part of Identity Europa. And,
oh my
you know,
God.
yeah, you know, and he could have been trying to recruit, or, you know, what's also sad is that if it's a school resource officer and there are black kids in your school and you're part of a white supremacist group.
Yep.
I'm just saying.
Yep.
Like, I don't even need to say much else.
God, don't get me started on school resource officers, dude. The shit I have seen.
Yeah. So, you know, long story short, Gremolo, I think that's what my response to that kind of question would be. You know, as in, what the left does versus what the right does is not even comparable. And I think that when it comes to people saying, oh, well, it's only okay when you guys do it. Okay, well, the left protests against violence against black people, whereas right-wing nutjobs did an insurrection. So, you tell me which one's worse.
Right. And we can make like the kind of like political philosophy angle of like, well, ultimately the right's ideology, their motivations, their end goals align with capital, if we want to get like real lefty with them. Like, your interests align with them. Traditionalism, conservatism, protectionism, like these very like nationalistic fervor that exist on the right, those don't upend the system. They just keep it where it's at or regress it back to a time that was beneficial for your in group. The left...
Well, even then...
Go ahead.
Professor Ibram Kendi even, like, made a salient point to me in that capitalism and racism are pretty much like intertwined,
Mm-hmm.
interconnected as a conjoined twin. Because modern capitalism as we know it grew from the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you could even argue that part of what keeps capitalism intact is also the enforcement of racist policies because it's been built on nothing else. So
Yeah.
we can also apply that to sexism, homophobia,
Yeah.
class hierarchies.
I always tell
etc.
people, like, capitalism, its entire existence is predicated on the maintenance and facilitization, if that's the correct way to say that, of an underclass. In America, that underclass is people of color, BIPOC people, women, LGBTQ plus folks, like marginal people who exist at the intersections of marginalization. That's our underclass. And
Yep.
that's how this has grown. It's how it's operated, and it continues today. I mean, just being in Louisiana, like I show people that all the time. Were you there when I was on my Louisiana sucks rant?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, I showed people like why Louisiana is as poor as it is, but the governor's mansion. I'll say that again. The governor's mansion is maintained and staffed by prison labor, so it's quite literally slavery in a what looks like a plantation home, because it is a plantation home.
Well, funny you mentioned that. That's pretty much what the 13th Amendment allows.
Yes.
And it was supposed to be, and I'm certain that you know this one, but the 13th Amendment has a loophole in it that while it outlaws slavery in almost every other instance, if you're incarcerated for a crime, you can be used for slave labor. End of story.
Yeah, Killer Mike taught me that.
Yeah, Killer Mike's awesome.
Yeah, he's based.
Killer Mike is super based.
Yeah, he's got some lib takes here and there, but all in all, I like him. Okay, so we went through the kind of dichotomy of political violence on the spectrum. What's another thing that's probably going to come up? The damage. So in that discussion of like, why the left is worse, what I predict will come out is that when riots and looting happens, because conservatives never riot, they never do that, and the looting happens, well, they're hurting their own community. I don't know what your specific like legal background is, like what you're super interested in, at least, because like even people who like have a specific practice like environmental law or whatever, like you have your little like side things that you enjoy within your study, but financial or like I guess business legal, I guess would be the way to put it. I'm not a legal brain, but like that they're hurting their own community, and the leftist counter rhetoric to that is, well, usually all of this is insured, and it's usually like big companies like Target is a big one we saw, AutoZone, Walmart, JCPenney, whatever, that are getting looted. A good video that I saw come out after or during 2020 was a woman saying, it's like, well, we don't own any of this. It's not ours. We have no wealth in this community because we don't own, our community. We just live in it, and barely. Is there some kind of like legal way I can kind of, without sounding too like contrarian to that grievance, because that's what it is. It's like, oh, you're looting Target. Well, that's a petty bourgeois perspective. What's like or I guess maybe give me your thoughts on that, and then we can maybe explore legal.
Okay, so I mean, legally speaking, a crime is a crime.
Right.
And so from what I remember, even though the prosecution did not do a great job in this case, my mind goes back to the Rittenhouse matter, where, we have to basically just remember the prosecutor saying that if the people that Rittenhouse murdered, because even though legally he wasn't determined to murder, like, morally I still think he's a murderer. So, and that's just my opinion, Rittenhouse. So, don't sue me. That's not defamation. That's
What do
just
you mean,
opinion.
dude? This is America. You can't sue people for libel or defamation here. It's so fucking hard.
I mean, it's hard, but, you know, just doing a cover your ass letter there.
Sure.
So,
sure.
You know, the prosecution basically said that if Rittenhouse didn't kill the people that, you know, were allegedly looting or doing damage to property, then they would have been prosecuted too.
Right.
So, you know, you can't really rely on legal justifications for, you know, why it's morally just or it's okay for, you know, protesters to damage property. Because, you know, really my thought process is that, you know, and I guess I'm a little biased because I do have my own business.
Right.
Although I don't have like a brick and mortar place right now. But if I did, I don't think that, you know, burning property or rioting would be a great way to go. But even then, my counter to that counter is that, you know, and again, don't want to sound like a white person, like just a generic white guy saying this, but
okay,
you know, when MLK talked about, you know, protests, and when he was faced with criticisms that his protests were violent riots, basically, you know, causing criminality, because that was the common criticism and complaint from, you know, society at large at that time.
Yeah, the famous newspaper comic. I plan to have another peaceful protest tomorrow, and like the city's on fire behind MLK.
Yeah, you know, there's a reason why he said that, you know, what is it? Writing is the voice of the oppressed, or
language of the unheard, I think is what he said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There you
go.
Thank you. You know, it's the language of the unheard, and if society basically shuts down every other way of protest, you know, against your own oppression, then it would be inevitable for some people to take to violence like that and, you know, riot or loot. So, even though I don't think that it would be justified, like, I would say that, you know, it is still an inevitable result of, you know, protests against injustice, especially in a capitalist system like this, where one of the best ways to harm a capitalist is through their wallet and through, you know, basically reducing the exploitation that they commit on a daily basis, you know, in the name of profit. Because at the end of the day, like, I couldn't really care about looting, you know, or burning like a Target, you know, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Twitch. Because, I mean, as you said, they're a big chain that's put other smaller, like, family-owned businesses out of commission constantly, and have been a net negative on the communities that they inhabit. So those large multinational corporations aren't really part of the communities.
Exactly.
You know, in the way that right-wingers would say they are.
Yeah.
And I just think that it's disingenuous to focus on that when, legally speaking, yes, it's against the law to burn a business. Like, that's the risk that people take when they are, you know, when they choose to do that in a protest, you know, in making themselves heard when they've been ignored through every other attempt at protest that they've tried to do. And then something else that I would say to that too is the response to leftists doing that is to not have right-wing counter-protesters come at them with guns and shoot people, because defense of another person's property is never legally seen as self-defense. Period. Like, that cannot be self-defense, because another person's property can be replaced, whereas another person, if they cannot defend themselves, that would be justifiable self-defense,
Yeah.
criminally speaking.
Wait. So, it is not, or I guess, is it admissible in court? Is that the term that I'm looking for?
Admissible for what?
So, if I hypothetically saw that there was civil unrest happening in an area, and I went to, let's say, a gas station, okay, with a couple of my buddies, and maybe lied about being an EMT, like, on camera. I don't know why I would put that in, but just let's add that in for some flavor, and ended up getting into altercations and agitating people in a community where there is civil unrest while open carrying a long rifle. That I would not be that would not be admissible in court as self-defense. What?
Well, okay, so admissibility is for evidence. That's more a legal defense that you present to the court, and I don't think that legal defense would really work, because I mean, I'll just say it this way, like, I do not agree with how that case turned out, just based on, my understanding of self-defense and what has traditionally been seen as exercising self-defense. I think they fucked up in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also a lot of, there was also just a lot that went wrong with that matter in terms of the prosecution and the defense, the prosecution sort of slipping on its ass in terms of presenting evidence and, preparation in general. So I think that if we're to talk about what actually should have been the result, like, I don't think that he was justified in, defending another person's gas station. Right. That was not his business. There are police.
Even if he was asked, like, it makes no sense.
Yeah. Well, exactly, Mowdy. And that could have gone to intent had that been properly introduced into evidence before they attempted to do so in the actual trial. Because even though that may not be probative of, Rittenhouse committing the crime at the point where he did, it could have gone to motive or intent.
You see, that's such a weird thing, because we kind of understand how, like, trials work, at least in like the layman sense, that, oh, well, if during the trial a piece of, like, hard-hitting, groundbreaking evidence is brought forward, then they'll be like, oh, you say that you had no intentions of doing violence, Mr. Rittenhouse? Well, we've obtained a recording of you saying you want to do violence. Like, that's kind of like how we would imagine in the layman sphere that would work. But apparently not.
No, and that's because there are rules of civil procedure and rules of evidence that have to be followed, and that were, produced over, like, the several hundred years that America's been in existence, and then well before that with, the English common law and the concepts that came from that. But the rules of evidence and the rules of civil procedure and the rules of criminal procedure all pop up, with their own variations on a state-by-state basis. So depending on what Wisconsin... It was Wisconsin, right? Yeah. Based on Wisconsin's rules of evidence and rules of criminal procedure, the evidence could have been introduced far too late in the process when they should have tried to admit it before that time.
Yeah. So
yeah,
I guess, and I don't know how much time you have. I don't want to keep you forever if you have stuff to do today. I guess the thing that I keep going back to in my mind, thinking about this discussion tomorrow, is I don't think anything can really come out of a broader philosophical debate about violence unless it's narrowed down to something like very specific. Like it would have to be a dichotomy. It would have to be like a binary choice of like which one is acceptable or which one does less. You know? And
right.
I just don't see where someone who may consider themselves conservative or pro-capitalist or just like anti-woke, whatever that means, that they can make the argument that their ideological opposition, leftists, are more violent. I just can't see that reality. And so it seems like it's kind of a DOA of sorts.
I mean, it's a weird debate topic.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. But my position, I'll put it to you this way, Graham. Like, my position on Twitch debates is I don't do them for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that really because when you conduct a case in court, in, you know, an actual trial, there are factual questions you have to answer, and it's, you know, it's just a matter of like trying to get to a specific answer with the evidence and the facts and the law and the theory that you have. So in terms of, you know, Twitch debates, I think that if it's just a question of, you know, oh, well, political violence debate, I think that may be far too broad a question to ask. So it could go in a whole bunch of different directions. But in terms of just the strict legality of it, you know, I think that if we're to just talk about the legal harm done, the right-wing violence, it far outweighs the left-wing violence. And if we're to talk about the, you know, sociological and legally adjacent considerations, then we just have to acknowledge that the state and the system favors right-wing violence and treats it far less seriously than anything that might challenge, you know, the state's status quo of capitalist exploitation.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that would be the takeaway from what I would think about and focus on. But we'll just have to see how what direction the debate goes in general.
Yeah, because I think Queen Alexis said it was going to be myself, Mythic, James from the Internet, Chud Logic, and like 2 other people I've never heard of. So, I mean, clearly there is a slant to the left on this panel. So, the only thing I can imagine is like there's probably going to be some lefty infighting, maybe, of like where state violence kind of has a line drawn, like my stance on like jailing like billionaires and hey, some millionaires too, just like straight up like no, like crimes against humanity, you go to jail, CEO of ExxonMobil, Sackler family, like no, like the jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
There's like no legal precedent for it unless you were able to somehow prove in court that, yeah, you did through like your pursuit of profit contribute greatly to climate change and to the obstruction of anything that might mitigate it. So yeah, crimes against humanity. Like that would be like, unless there was a legal precedent, like there's nothing that I'm just like talking out of my ass.
Well, and that's why I think the law is not something that should... I think that's why the law should not purely be the only thing that's really considered here, because just to give you an offhand example, there was a decision in I think either 2020 or 2021, where, you know, slave labor who sued major American companies for slave labor overseas, like that claim was just dismissed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Like they didn't have the standing to do that, and it's just like, okay, well, fuck it. I guess they can do with slavery. I guess.
Yeah.
So long as it's overseas and not on American soil.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't necessarily rely on just legal grounds for where this would go. But I know I've had a conversation with Chud Logic before on actually the Rittenhouse and January 6 matters.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, I think that he got very upset when I called Rittenhouse a murderer, even though I clarified that he wasn't legally found a murderer, but philosophically I think that, you know, he still is, in my opinion. So, I don't know. It'll be an interesting discussion that you have, so we'll just have to see how it goes.
Yeah. And, like, generally speaking, I take the approach, especially because I'm not, like, a super, like, legally minded person, you know? I'm a humanities Andy. And, I kind of just take the point of view of, like, legality is not a substitute for, like, morality. So, when we're
Absolutely
making...
not.
Yeah, like, when we're making arguments like, oh, well, it's still illegal to, like, throw that brick through the Starbucks window. Like, yeah... But I don't think there's, like, a moral problem with that, you know? Unless that brick is being thrown through the cafe of, like, a black-owned business. Then I start to have an issue with it, because now we have, like, social and political motivations.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why Crystal Knox was, like, morally such a fucked up thing.
Yeah.
You know, so, for sure. But... I'm also going to not take up too much of your time, so thank you so much for inviting me on, and, you know, I'm glad that we could have this discussion, and I hope that's, you know, anything that I stated here, like, was somewhat helpful. Again, I apologize
it definitely
for going
was.
into ramble mode.
No, I'm the same way. Don't worry about it. No, you did great, and I really enjoyed having you on, folks. In the chat is a link to Kevin's channel. Go give him a follow. I'm sorry, did I ever ask your pronouns?
Oh, I'm he, him.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. We have a lot of Hinbies in the chat, and I want to be respectful. I know I'm on thin ice lately, so, you know, trying to do my best.
No, I appreciate that, and, yeah, you know... That's why it's just always good to ask.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you coming on and giving your takes. You have a very, like, precise, like, legal repertoire of information. So it's always interesting to get your takes on stuff.
Well, thank you so much for that, and thank you so much, Latvian and K-Pars, for your kind words. And with that, I will talk to y'all later.
Later. Appreciate it.